and I oversee all of the social emotional learning and the internal programming that happens at Vox.
And I'm Susan Landrum, also a social worker by trade and facilitator of Surafoma. And then my other gig is executive director of Vox ATL. And I've been with the organization for about 6 years, just over 6. And I'm lucky to get to do this important work with Josie every day. And I know that we're all familiar with the work of the Boys and Girls Club. And I thought I'd just quickly share a little bit about Vox and not take up too much time because I know some of y'all are familiar with us, but we are a local organization here in Atlanta that has been around since 1993. And we are leading a youth voice movement where teens from very diverse backgrounds, Atlanta is a big city with a lot to offer, and young people have many different experiences here, come together to create a stronger and more equitable community through leadership. So leadership at all levels of the organization itself and in our community, as well as uncensored self-expression. So the teens that we work with create content that's published online consistently at voxatl.org, as well as publishing in print 3 times a year. And those print publications go to local Boys and Girls Clubs, as well as other youth-serving organizations and schools. So it is a vibrant, youth-led space that is arts-focused, and Josie brings her knowledge and expertise in trauma-informed care and our approach to everything that we do. And so with that, I will toss it to her.
Yeah, so in addition to all of the fun publishing that we do, we also have internal and external programming that serves teens both in our space for after school and summer, and external, we go out to the community and bring workshops to other youth that may not be able to come to our space. So we have spoken word, a poetry program that has open mics, slams, the Atlanta Youth Poet Laureate program, in addition to social emotional learning and skill building programming as well, that encompasses a minutia of things from cooking workshops to fun things like music review writing.
I just did a really excellent tech check thing where I was talking while I was muted. But when you are not speaking, do keep yourself muted because we are in a trauma-informed space. We would love to stay in gallery view as much as possible so we can check in on each other and see each other's faces if y'all are up to sharing video. Use the chat. It is an excellent function for us to make sure that we have a log of your questions and comments, and it's just a great way to connect if you have a thought pop into your head or a question for somebody else. Use your reactions. Let us know that you're feeling the content by clapping or snapping or raising your hand, and then we'll talk more specifically about the annotate function in a second that some of y'all might have experienced before. But those are just our quick tech things to keep in mind. I know we've all spent a lot of time on Zoom in the past few months, so won't belabor it.
So this is the agenda for today. We have a lot to cover in only 45 minutes together. We're going to start off with a welcome and a community builder. And as club staff, many of you are very familiar with what community builders are, getting to know each other a little bit better. Then we're going to step into group agreements so that we can all come to an understanding of how to create an emotionally safe space for talking about some of these topics. We'll do a virtual icebreaker, a moment of reflection, and then we're gonna jump into the meat towards the end. What is the trauma-informed approach and how can you start doing those practices at your club? And then some resources and our close.
So just want to ask y'all to very quickly introduce yourselves in the chat. Josie, I'm sorry, this was absolutely your piece of the puzzle, so I'm gonna.
No worries at all. I know you were excited for us to jump in with getting to know one another a little bit better. So the community builder, or the go around as we like to call it at Vox, is what's one thing that's bringing you joy or has brought you joy in this time. So if you could drop your name, your organization, and your role in the chat, along with one thing that has brought you joy. For me, it's definitely been yoga, and being able to still do yoga from home with the virtual studio that my yoga studio puts out. And it's been a source of peace and mindfulness for me. Let's take a moment so that we can all share. And Kate is going to call some of them out.
Emily from the Boys and Girls Club of Metro Atlanta. She has found joy from reading in her hammock. That sounds lovely. Sarah from the Boys and Girls Club in Knoxville has found joy in making art every day. Susan likes long walks during this time. Bert likes hiking and driving to find joy. I can relate to that a lot. Walks and hiking are my go-to for self-care as well. Working out. Lance is liking, we're scrolling, so sorry. We're liking working on sculptures. Ooh, that sounds lovely. Tasha is from the Boys and Girls Club of, where did you write it, Tasha? Can't find it.
Central Florida.
Central Florida. Thank you. It's okay. Seeing her daughter break through the worries of the pandemic. Yeah, it's important. It must be difficult having kiddos home at this time. Amy from the Boys and Girls Club of Tennessee Valley. Family time with my 3 kids and playing outside with them. Awesome. Thank you guys for sharing. I think it's important to take a moment to reflect on the positive things during this time.
Yes. And as we continue to move along through the agenda, we want to introduce group agreements. How do we want to spend the remainder of this time together? And to that end, we want to know, what do you need in order to feel comfortable connecting today? So we have a list of some examples up on this slide. Some are from the Vox space, which you see on the right-hand side. And then some are those that we kind of wanted to call out today, some special attention to, which are being open-minded, having some fun, let's all be inclusive, and then, of course, the confidentiality, making sure that we're respecting the information that everyone is sharing with us. If there's anything you want to call out, I'll give it 30 more seconds, and you can either shout it out really quickly or drop it in the chat.
So this is another very familiar BGCA practice that many of you probably do with your kiddos in program spaces, meant to be a collaborative practice between staff and youth, or staff and staff in this situation. So this is a safe space where you're able to share ideas, and we'll all come together to agree how we will move forward.
If nobody has anything, we can go ahead and move forward, but does everybody feel good about the ones that have been lifted? You can give a head nod or a reaction. Awesome. All right, let's keep it moving.
So we're going to do a little bit of a Voxi Icebreaker using the annotate function on your Zoom tools. So Kate is going to help walk y'all through it, because her screen looks a little bit more like your screen, and then we'll apply it to a fun icebreaker that you can use with your own in your own context.
So if you are looking at your screen and you have it in full screen mode, you'll see along the top it says there's a green bar that says you are viewing Susan Landrum's screen, and to the right of that it says view options. Everybody see that? Nod or thumbs up? Yep, cool. Okay, click the view options, and then the third option from the top will say annotate. You'll click on annotate, and then the fourth option from the left is a stamp, and you'll just select what stamp you want. So if everybody can select a stamp, I'm going to select a heart, and I'm going to click on my slide. So I just put a heart on the slide right now. So everybody practice that.
Awesome.
Does anybody have trouble? Need me to go over it one more time? You can unmute yourself if you need help, that's okay.
Cool.
Cool.
Going to go ahead and clear these drawings. And then we're going to apply the tool on this next slide, where on the fantastic emoji spectrum, you're going to check in with us and tell us how you're feeling right now. Today, we've already had a full day, and use that stamp tool and annotate. If you feel like sharing aloud to the group, you're welcome to do so. Put it in the chat, hold it close to your heart. This is a opportunity to share, but definitely respecting people's privacy as well.
I'll share. I selected the end guy who looks kind of happy and loved, and the sleepy guy, because I'm feeling grateful that I'm able to be in a space with people that are interested in learning about the importance of trauma-informed practices. But I am feeling a little bit tired because it's already been a long day, and I'm sure you guys can all relate to that, having been in a lot of virtual meetings already.
I will share. Well, I picked the one with the sunglasses because now I feel cool and relaxed, like I'm comfortable. When I first started, I was a little bit anxious, you know, working on the platform and learning all these new platforms. And I actually learned how to use Annotate today with you guys, and this is very interesting. You know, there's a lot of things in Zoom that I really didn't know how to use, and now it's just giving me inspiration and just go on YouTube and go on other platforms to learn more about how to use Zoom.
Thanks for sharing that.
I'll share. I'm in between the two of the really happy guy girl and the one that looks a little crazy, happy, kooky. I wear glasses, as you can see, so I will say I've already Zoomed like 3 times today and my eyes are burning. But I will, on a positive note, say that, as Lance said, it's exciting to learn about all of these different platforms, and I learned something as well. Annotate. Didn't know. And now I have to do it with my elementary and teen Zooms today. I'm gonna act like a real professional and bring something to the table.
That's awesome. I really also appreciated how you named how you were feeling in your body. That's a very trauma-informed question, is to also get young people to reflect on just how they're feeling physically. And so you named a holistic check-in, and thank you for modeling that, because knowing that a teen is hungry or has a headache or didn't sleep well last night is hugely important for making sure that they feel cared for. So thanks for that. So we have just spent a good deal of time, and I would say the right amount of time. So taking the time to really intentionally check in and create community. And I'm wondering, I think I just answered the prompt myself, but I am wondering, through your lens and through your experience of this time, why do you think that we do this? Why do you think that we create this space for people? And you can, again, speak out loud or put it in the chat. I'm going to clear our annotations.
Just providing kids, people, staff, or whomever the space to express themselves. So many kids are growing up in spaces where they can't speak, or it could be something where if you're not spoken to, you don't speak, or you automatically know your surroundings and who agrees with your lifestyle or who you are, and so maybe you don't express yourself. So just having a space where someone can speak and not be judged you know, that allows you, when kids get that message early on, you live a healthy adult life. And unfortunately, many adults are just learning of these spaces. So as we share with our club members and our kids the opportunity to express themselves, you see that their parents didn't have that opportunity. And so it's just beautiful to see kids walk through this process of coming into being a teen or an adult and getting those skills early from spaces like this.
Absolutely. I also want to lift up something that Emily said in the chat around learning it's okay to admit that you're not okay and you don't always have to tough it out and that it's not a competition. If someone is struggling more than you, it doesn't lessen your struggle. And absolutely agree with that.
We also know that there is a really powerful intersection between trauma-informed care and the trauma-informed approach and youth development best practices. A lot of the practices that we might see as one or the other are actually very interrelated. And I will let my colleagues talk more about that in the sort of meat of the sandwich, but I did want to just frame that for you. And yes, Lance, I think that this piece around overcoming your fears is really important as we think about how we do apply the trauma-informed approach in an art setting, because we are asking young people to step into a really creative space that can be highly vulnerable, and they're sharing some of the deepest parts of themselves in their creations. And so ensuring that they feel safe and that they feel heard and that you know what to expect and that they can connect with one another will only lead to more genuine and enthusiastic creativity. And so I think that all of these things that we do just set us up for a much more fruitful creative space too. So with that, I'm going to invite Kate to take the mic to really ground us in what the trauma-informed approach is and what it looks like in a Boys and Girls Club setting.
Thank you, Susan. I think for me, just kind of adding on to what Susan was sharing about the reflection piece, is it's about viewing our kiddos and the people we serve and their families as people, not just as students of our art or club members or that kid's mom, as a whole person. And I think that that's what is really tying this to the trauma work, why it's important to do these check-ins, why it's important to ask what's going on and how you're feeling. So I just want to start off. I know we don't have a ton of time, but we'll be quick about it. And I'm going to give you guys some prompts because I want this to be interactive. So just start off by typing one word. What is trauma? What do you know about trauma? What do you think of? And I'm going to read those out loud. Life-altering events. Great answer. This isn't your first trauma training, Tasha. Anxieties. Definitely. An event or series of events with lasting negative impacts. Yep, that is correct. So while you guys continue typing, basically what I wanted you to start thinking about is, often in our minds, if you've been through trauma training, you know this already, but often in our minds, we think of trauma as this big, heavy event, like a war or a traumatic loss or sexual abuse. And yes, those things are traumatic, but there's many things that define a traumatic event. It's what is perceived by the person experiencing it as physically and emotionally harmful or life-threatening and has the potential to have lifelong impacts. So that could be chronic and severe bullying for a period of time. That could be exclusion. That could be discrimination over a lifetime. That could be poverty and the consequences of living in poverty. That could be instability in food insecurity and housing. So there's lots of additional things that maybe we don't always think of as trauma that are trauma. So if you're really broadening your definition in that way, it's easier to understand that a trauma-informed approach isn't just for people who we view as have experienced trauma. It's for really all of us, because we can all relate to some of those experiences, and we have all suffered some sort of trauma in our lives that makes this approach the best approach for all people. So what is a trauma-informed approach? A trauma-informed approach is not a checklist. It is not a specific procedure. It is not a specific policy. I can't give you a roadmap that says do this and now you're trauma-informed. It is understanding these 6 key principles that you can see on the screen in this image, and adhering to practices with your kiddos, with your staff, with your families that embody those values. So those principles are safety, trustworthiness and transparency, peer support, collaboration and mutuality, empowerment, voice and choice, and cultural, historical, and gender issues. So we'll move on to the next slide and we'll get into that a little bit more. That image you just saw, before I forget, is actually from CDC. So I'm gonna give you a lot of information, but there's gonna be a lot of resources, because I have a short amount of time to do this, that will come in a follow-up email that you can do your own reading if you want more information on this. So I'm just trying to give you kind of an overview lens of what this means. So each of these key principles is where you need to start thinking about how you can work to be a trauma-informed practitioner or service provider for your kids and families. Trauma is not a destination. You're not going to be like, I did these things and now I'm trauma-informed. It's a journey. It's continual reflection. It's continual improvement. It's continual checking in about what your family and your community and your staff and your kiddos need, and adjusting your practices to meet those needs to the best of your ability in a holistic way. So the first one, I'm just going to go through these and read them out loud, and then we'll have an interactive component where you guys are going to type in or unmute yourself and chime in ways that you think that you are currently or could be embodying these values in your organization. So as I'm reading, I kind of want you to start thinking about that. So the first principle is safety. So an example, what that definition might look like in a club is organizational leadership, youth development professionals, so frontline staff, prioritize physical and emotional safety to ensure all staff, youth, and families feel safe at the club or youth center. So thinking about what are you doing in your club or youth center that meets that. There's lots of ways to meet that. Trustworthiness and transparency. Organizational decisions are made with transparency with the goal of building and maintaining trust with youth, staff, and families. Again, thinking about what are ways that you personally and your organization does that. Peer support, youth development professionals, so our frontline staff, our relationships from between colleagues, our youth to youth peer relationships, and our relationships with families and caregivers lead to further enhancing safety, hope, trust, and collaboration. Collaboration and mutuality. Organizational leadership works collaboratively with youth development professionals, so our frontline staff, in the decision-making process, and club or youth center staff partner with youth and families to shape organizational practices. The organization recognizes that every person has a role to play and everyone has value and strengths in these relationships. Again, thinking about how you do that. Organizational empowerment, voice, and choice, organizational leadership, youth development professionals, youth, and families are all recognized and all valued for their strengths and contributions to the club or youth center that you work at. Each is provided the opportunity to participate in shared decision-making, choice, and goal setting while spending time with you. Thinking about how you might do that as well. And then cultural, historical, and gender issues. Organizational leadership and youth development professionals actively work to eliminate stereotypes, bias, and discrimination on race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, age, religion, gender identity, and socioeconomic status through your club or youth center policies and practices. And again, thinking about what that might look like. So I see some activity in the chat here. So I want you guys, the next piece of it, and Josie's gonna help me out with this, is to think about how you can demonstrate each of these. So I don't know if it's more helpful for us to stay on the last slide. So I'll just pop this one up for a second. Each of these principles, I want you to just pick one or pick all of them, whatever is easiest for you. How do you personally demonstrate a commitment to that specific trauma-informed value? What are you doing to contribute to a trauma-informed approach at your club? So Susan, can you flip back so they can see them? Cool. And then I'll just give you guys a minute. I want to see some typing in the chat, and I'll read those out loud because I think I have about 2 minutes left before we move on to the next slide. While we're thinking, I'm going to just kind of like get your gears turning a little bit. So prioritizing emotional safety, because I think it's pretty easy to understand how we prioritize physical safety. There's clear policies around that. Emotional safety might look like the emotional check-in that we all did as a group. And maybe you do that with your staff or with your kids or with your families every time you interact. Trustworthiness and transparency, that could look like making sure that your families are involved in your orientation process and your youth are involved in an orientation process when starting at the club or starting in your program space, so that they're familiar with what the expectations are and what happens when they don't follow the expectations, and they're part of that process. There's no secrets. They're part of that process throughout the entire time. So these examples that I'm saying out loud are just to get your gears turning. This is not do this and then you're trauma informed. There is no roadmap for this. I cannot stress that enough. So Tasha, thank you for participating. Peer support, making sure that staff and leadership are trained to identify and support youth, I'm assuming, from Split University trainings. Yes, that's great. I think that one's probably, we do that pretty well, BGCA, right? Like we do a good job of facilitating a sense of belonging and connection for our kiddos by like pairing them with groupers and doing all these like fun activities for them to know each other. So that's like a perfect example of peer support. Collaboration and mutuality, that could look like having staff provide feedback on an ongoing basis to organizational leadership about how you're approaching certain aspects of your club. Allowing students to take a leadership role in teaching class. Yes, that's awesome. That's a very good example of empowerment, voice, and choice, and collaboration and mutuality. Bert says cultural is the one he's focusing on. I really try to match my PPTAs to the commodities or communities, I'm sorry, they serve, but also rotate them. I'm grateful I have a diverse group, but also that's awesome. Very great example. Awesome, awesome. So you guys can continue to type and share because I love to see that feedback. And I'm going to pass it to Josie because I don't want to go too far over on time. And she's going to go through what this might look like specifically in arts.
Thanks, Kate.
No problem.
All right. So we touched on a lot of this already, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. But as Susan lifted up earlier, it's always important to note that trauma-informed care is youth development best practice, and we just want to make sure that we are taking a holistic approach to working with our youth and not only assessing who they are, but the environments around them and the impacts that they have. Also lifted up earlier is just a couple of different strategies to keep in mind when working with your youth, assuming everyone is dealing with or has dealt with trauma, especially in the current COVID-19 pandemic. I think that's important to pay note to. And then definitely some just like things, little tidbits to know about youth that are impacted by trauma. Usually their sense of control and their sense of competence is often impacted. And also we want to make sure that we're giving them lots of love, warmth, and structure as we're working with them so that they know that they have those things in place and they feel supported and loved from all of us. We'll move on to the next one. So some important strategies, and these are things that you can use depending on how often you're meeting with your youth. Obviously, there's some youth that we can only touch one time versus youth that we get to maybe interact with on a recurring basis. We're in a group with them or they're frequent visitors of our spaces. So the most important one I want to lift up and what we took so much time in the beginning doing is setting our agreements and our intentions. So really making sure that we're establishing norms around how we interact with one another and how youth interact with each other. So an example of that is when we do our Atlanta WordWorks, open mics and poetry slams, especially because they are usually talking about things that have impacted them in their lives seriously, and because it kind of has a competitive nature to it, we really want to establish on the front end that it's a space of love and affirmation for one another, and not a space of like booing or discouraging people from sharing their stories or being emotional. So we have different things that we use to interact with our youth, whether it's letting them give each other snaps or claps or saying things like "go in poet." We have a way that we send energy to one another, which is just rubbing your hands together and sending love. If somebody's visibly emotional or sharing something that is difficult for them, we want to make space for the teens to always, or the youth to always check in about their emotions, so that emotional and physical well-being, being able to make sure that they're taking care of their body, or at least just checking in with their body, making sure they've eaten or we have snacks on hand, and just being able to move their body, even if it's something like closing your eyes and taking a quick breath like we did in the beginning, or playing an energizing game like Zip Zap Zop, or just having like a mindful moment, doing a yoga pose or something like that, just so that they can be aware of how different stressors are impacting them. Another thing making time for is you want to make sure that you check in with people at the beginning of something, and also make time for reflections or debriefs. In poetry slams, obviously some sensitive topics come up, so we always want to acknowledge that people are going to be feeling what they're going to feel. So we want them to let them know it's normal to experience any emotion that they're going to experience, and not feel shame for it. Whether that is they want to debrief with another peer or an adult, or even walk away if they have to. I think making space for that is really important. And then the last thing I wanted to lift up is sometimes youth don't really have the opportunity or the space to express themselves in the way they want. So having like really guided prompts around things that get at some of the things that they have going on in their lives, and making it fun and creative as a way to tie it in and disassociate from the negative experience of it, whether it's creating some sort of art or having a prompt around poetry, whatever mediums you use in your space, making sure that they have time to really process what they're going through. We call it the narrative approach in social work, where you can help them work through an experience by writing about it or journaling about it, and detaching themselves from a problem and not thinking that they are the problem, but that it's something that is externalized that they're experiencing. So those are a couple of things I want to lift up, and if y'all have any questions, you can drop them in the chat, but if not, we can keep it moving.
Lance, I noticed that you put in the chat two things. One is sharing something that you've experienced when you were a young person that might be relatable to a youth that you're working with, and I think that that's hugely valuable in ensuring that they know that they're not alone in their experience. And then the second piece around culminating community events for students, parents, and clubs is so important, and it made me think about the poetry slams that Atlanta WordWorks does do, and the value in seeing a teen who's worked on a poem for a semester get up in front of their peers and share that. And that is why the trauma-informed approach around creating this space is so important, because we know as the practitioners how much love and heart and work a young person has put into that moment. So holding that space is really valuable. So thank you for lifting those things up.
Yeah, absolutely. In addition to us sharing our experiences, we can never also underestimate the power of teens sharing their experiences with one another and supporting each other through those things. That's some of the most powerful things that I have seen in my work, is having them uplift each other and the difference in the impact that makes as well. So creating space for that.
So we could talk about a trauma-informed approach all day, every day, and we won't do that today. But we do want you to know that there are a number of resources that will be headed your way from this particular session, as well as things that apply directly to club culture and what y'all are doing in the clubs, some recommendations and things that we do at Vox. All of that is also going to be available to you on the Surafoma website. So there's a number of ways that you'll have access to these resources. I am curious, and we'll leave a moment for y'all if you have specific needs or specific questions or things that you specifically, it's a lot of uses of the word specific, but we would love to know if there are particular ways that we can meet you where you are and get those resources in your hands. So as you're thinking about the closing of this day, and don't hesitate to reach out and let us know what those needs are. And just to give you a little preview, this is a huge and beautiful list of things through the clubs that you will be sent as a part of the follow-up from this. So there's a lot there, a lot.
As Susan said, we can and would talk to you about trauma-informed practices all day, every day. I would happily do it. So please, 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 please reach out to me if you have any specific club-related questions about these things. That's a list that's coming from me. Well, Susan will send it to you, but that was a list from BGCA practices and things that you can do. But I would be happy to consult with anybody that wants support. Susan, are you going to CC me on the email just so that they have my email? Perfect.
And again, I really appreciated what Kate said about this not being like a checklist, but more of a roadmap, in the sense that you can adapt these practices to your context. You know, Vox is its own context, and each club is its own context. And I think thinking through what works for you and your young people is really valuable and important. So I appreciated hearing that.
To answer Tasha's question, she just asked about mindfulness series on Spillette. So I'm not sure if everybody's aware of this, but we just got a partnership with Will, and we have a whole, probably like, I don't even know the number, like 50 different trainings that specifically focus on mindfulness, and it's about your own development, but obviously those practices can be applied to working with youth as well. They're brand new. This partnership was like a week old, and so I would recommend you to check it out. They're great.
So in closing, we have a beautifully intimate group here, so I'm not going to break y'all out into smaller groups, but I am wondering if you wouldn't mind sharing either aloud or in the chat as you do enter into the rest of your day and the remainder of your week. What's one thing that you'll do to take care of yourself this week? We all know that as youth development workers, we are only as good as the care that we are giving ourselves. And so I'm curious to know if what intention you'll set, what we can be thinking about for you this week. One thing that you'll just do to make sure that you are cared for. And again, you can say it out loud or put it in the chat.
I'll go. I like to participate in these. Something I try to be very intentional about with my own self-care is, even though I'm working from home, having defined times of when I work. So I'm very strict with my boundaries around those things, because I think it gets very easy to slip into working all of the time, feeling the need to be accessible all the time.
I'll go. Sort of the same, but not like I think for me it's more important to set an end cap by when I need to get things done, and like a hazard period. Like I spent the day building a pillow fort and hiding in it, like 2 hours before I can be like, okay, I need to get all this done now. And that works for me.
Yeah.
I'm going to practice stopping, just stopping. Although my club is closed, I'm usually in the club still, you know, maybe it's embarrassing, but like 9-10 hours. And it's a bad practice. I think I've found peace in still going to the club, even though it's closed.
Yeah.
Instead of staying home, you know, kind of like that, something, that blanket that you have. So my club is like my blanket. And I've got a wonderful home environment, great spouse, amazing kids. But in anticipation for our club's opening, I'm just going there to make sure the space is amazing for when the kids go back. And every day I get like the same calls. You're still at the club? Why are you not home? There's nobody there. Like, you can't use the excuse that you're working with kids and that kind of stuff. So I am slowly, like today, I'm in my living room. I'm not in an office. I'll be getting dressed after to go to the club, but I'm just going to practice stopping and just being in the moment and just enjoying that.
Just that positive no.
Yes, thank you. Thank you all so much for the time and commitment to this work. I couldn't be more grateful to know that there are folks like you caring for young people right now and always. So please be well. And again, you'll be hearing from us with all kinds of resources, and let us know if there's anything in particular that you need. And thank you again.
Thank you, everybody. I hope to hear from you in the future. Bye.